Hello, and welcome back to the Rawkode Academy. I am your host, Rawkode. Today is an episode of Rawkode Live, the show where we take a look at cloud native Kubernetes and fun development projects to help make your lives a little bit easier. And today we're tackling source control security posture, which is going to be a whole lot of fun. Of course, I am not smart enough to guide this conversation, but I am joined by someone who is. Hello, Barak from Scribe Security. How are you?
I'm great. I'm actually very happy to join you for this episode. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to join me and, do some live experimentation with an open source project called GitGat. But before we talk about that, can you tell our audience a little bit more about you?
Well, of course. I mean, I'm not just a pretty face. Like you said, my name is Barak Brudo. I'm currently working as the developer advocate for Scribe Security, a company that deals with software supply chain security. Other than that, I can say that before Scribe, I was a developer on and off for about 10 years. I have a degree in art education, a bit unusual in the field, I know. And other than explaining complicated concepts clearly, I'm also a dad. I'm a sci-fi and fantasy nerd. I'm a martial arts instructor, and I'm a dungeon master. So I'm a well-rounded individual. You can actually see some of my swords in the background.
Nice. I think it's always great that technology welcomes everybody from regardless of their background. Although you may be the first art major that I've had a conversation with. I am not great.
Education art major. So the education part is very useful. The art slightly less.
Yeah. Well, I'm not creative at all. I often say if I have to build a UI for something, it's going to be black text on a white background, and that to me that's good enough. However, thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing all that as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about Scribe and GitGat and everything in between?
Of course. Well, I'll try to keep this part, at least the Scribe part, short because GitGat is our focus here, and I don't want to take too much away from that. Scribe security, like I said, is dealing with software supply chain security. If you don't know what that is, software supply chain is the idea that everything, all the code, all the tools that you use are interconnected, and one weak link is enough to create an extensive blast radius. One of the most common examples in the field is the breach that happened at the end of 2020, SolarWinds.
Yep.
One little, I wouldn't quite say mistake, but one little change in the code exposed over 18,000 computers, lots of damages. As a result from that, a lot of regulatory changes happened. Scribe is right there to help companies secure the software supply chain, gain more visibility and trust into whatever code they're doing, including getting the provenance of the code, including making sure that stuff wasn't modified or changed where it's not supposed to. You're more than welcome. I mean, I'm saying to our viewers, you're more than welcome to check out the Scribe Security website. There's a freemium level, so you can try it out. And you can also, contact me either on LinkedIn or my email with any questions you might have. That's about Scribe. And again, I can talk about Scribe a lot more, but this is about GitGat. And GitGat is an open source project that was created by Scribe with the focus on SCM security posture. Now, SCM, for those of you who don't know the abbreviation, is source code management. So the most common source code management platform out there is GitHub, and I'm sure almost every single one of our listeners knows GitHub, but there are others out there. You probably know them, like GitLab or Bitbucket. There's a few more of them, at least big ones. There's quite a few more less well-known ones. And the idea behind GitGat is that a lot of these platforms were designed first and foremost to enable easy sharing of information, enabling lots of people to work together on code. Obviously, when you get a lot of people to work together on code, security is not always at the top of the list. Developers, most of them being lovely, trusting people, don't always consider the fact that some of them are not as nice and are mainly interested in stealing code or modifying it. Again, the idea behind GitGat is to hand you a report about your security posture, either of your private GitHub account, or if in case you're an organization with a GitHub account, about your organizational security posture. It involves quite a few things, and I will go over them in the report. The nice things about GitGat is, first of all, if you learn about GitGat, you know about the security posture, so you can handle it yourself if you want to. Secondly, that report is private. You generate the report once or continuously. All the results that you get are only yours. Nobody else sees them. Unlike, for example, a scorecard, which is public. Once you generate a scorecard for your repository, everybody can see it. So GitGat is private, and you can add quite a few little things to it, built into it, of course. So you could just configure them. For example, you can use a state to manage exactly what information you get on a continuous manner. You can add information to your state, for example, like you can set approved modifiers or contributors, people that if they happen to touch, or accounts actually, that if they happen to touch your code, you'll be alerted for it. There's lots of nifty new things that you can do with GitGat. Um, oh, and one other thing that I can mention is that I wrote a course about GitGat for the Linux Foundation. So everything that we're covering on this demonstration, you can check out on that course for free, because Linux Foundation courses are free. And like I said, even if you don't want to end up using GitGat for whatever reason, learning about GitHub security posture is great. Eventually, the more contributors we get to the repository, eventually, other than GitHub, we'll be able to add additional SCM systems to it. GitLab is almost completely ready. Currently, it's in the testing phase. I'm hoping that GitLab will be ready within a week or so, and once it is, I'll add it to the documentation on the repository, and GitLab users will be able to use GitGat just like GitHub users right now.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. And I think that, I don't know, it's not amusing, that's the wrong word, but so many security companies and products, and even the awareness of supply chain security over the last 3 years, all the origin stories are the SolarWinds hack. Like, it just, I do a lot of reviews for CFPs at KubeCon, and like ever since the SolarWinds attack, it's been supply chain, and I think we're now at like peak. This is where everybody is really starting to take security and their security posture a lot more seriously, which is a fantastic thing. So.
Well, there's a lot of other security breaches. It's just that SolarWinds is like the poster child. It's the most well known. So if I say, for example, Code Cove or Argo CD or some other names, it wouldn't resonate as much because most people wouldn't know about them. But SolarWinds, almost everybody heard about it because it was such a big deal at the time. So yeah, it's the poster child for software supply chain.
Yeah, and LastPass could be the poster child for something else, but I'm not going to say that word on air. So we got some love in the chat from James for the logo as well. So why don't we share my screen and get the repository up so people can see where it's at, and then we can talk a little bit more about it. So
sure. Well, since James said that the logo was fun, I can share that our CTO's daughter, who's a graphic design major, designed the logo.
There we go, front and center on the thing there.
Yeah,
but it's a Kit Kat, right? But it's a green Kit Kat. Is that what it's?
Yeah, actually, it says GitGat, but yeah, it's a play on
like
the KitKat.
Yeah,
yeah, it's a play on KitKat.
Nice. So for anyone who wants to play with GitGat in their own time, you can find it at github.com/scribe-public/GitGat. Nice. So before we dive into the hands-on component, we kind of shared kind of what it's doing. Like, I always ask this same question from similar, not security-based products, but developer experience products, and it's always like, should all repositories have GitGat running against it? Is that something you'd feel brave enough encouraging, or is there a moment, an inflection point where people should be like, oh, okay, now I should start taking a look at this?
Well, like I said, because you can run it privately, nobody gets to see the results other than you. And again, this is more useful for organization rather than private GitHub users. But if you have an organization, several repositories, you're working with teams, you're working with collaborators, sure, run the report once a week, once a month, once a day, doesn't matter. The report essentially produces a JSON, an XML, or a gist file. Look at it if you want to. If you don't, at least if something happens, you'll be able to go back and look at it and see where something went wrong. Even if you don't use the state, you'll just get the same report every time. At least if something happens, you'll be able to know about it. So I don't see any problem with either running it directly from an image, or downloading it, or forking it and running it yourself. There's lots of options. Because it's private, I don't really see a problem with it.
Okay. And is this something that organizations run once and they're done, or is this something we expect them to run on a regular cadence?
Because of the state that we included, running it continuously is encouraged. I know because I spoke to somebody in Checkmarks that at least one department is running it continuously at least once a week. Yeah, that was the intended idea. Just like with a lot of other security tools, running it once and being done with it doesn't really help. At whatever point in time you're running it, you might miss something. Only if you run a test continuously can you see changes or modifications, and you risk less about missing something that happened.
Awesome. All right, I think we're about ready to start getting hands-on and showing people what they can do with GitGat. But before I do, I'll pop James's comment on the screen, who has informed us that in Japan you can buy a green wasabi KitKat. So there you go. Never been to Japan, but it's on my list.
Okay.
Cool. So to get started, the step one, according to the README documentation here on the repository, is that I should go and get myself a GitHub personal access token. And it requires some permissions, the ability to read the organization user and public keys, repository status, deployments, repo hooks, public repo, and guest. So nothing frightening. I'm not scared of that.
Yeah. I should also say that GitGat, because I haven't mentioned it before, GitGat is written in Rego with OPA. Essentially, we're using the GitHub, at least in this instance, we're using the GitHub API to gather information. All the information that GitGat is using is meta information that is available through the API. And we're using OPA queries to get the information that we need, or actually that GitGat needs to generate the report. So it doesn't actually look into your code. It doesn't look into anything that you might be worried about sharing. All the permissions that GitGat requires are, like you saw, essentially reading permissions, except for gist. And we include a gist so that you can get the report not just as a JSON, but you can have it sent immediately to your gists. And if you're not familiar with gists, I'll show you where it is in a second. And it's much easier for most users to look at the report in a gist than as a JSON file.
All right. So we need a token, and I'm curious if I can do this from the GH command line. I've never tried it before.
I have the full path of creating it with the UI, but you're welcome to try it any way you want.
Yeah, let's see. I'll print the off token GitHub. Oh, no, okay, we don't want that. All right, I'll just do it for the UI. All right, so in fact, I should probably keep that up, right? Oh. There. Oh, come on, browser. There we go. Because I'll need to see the permissions. We're going to go to settings, developer settings. And can it be one of the new scoped tokens, or does it have to be a classic? I guess the scoped is fine based on what
It doesn't really
here.
matter. Essentially, you're going to look for a personal access token. That's what you're looking for. And I see that you will have, just like me, a two-factor authentication, which is good. It's one of the things that GitGat is checking.
All right, and it'll inspire us 7 days, so hopefully sooner. Public repositories read only, or all repositories, I guess, will be fine. And we need status. Maybe I should have done this a classic way because I don't know if these match
Yeah,
up.
I don't know this matchup either. It's too new. I always did it the classic way.
Yeah, I'm not feeling brave enough to try and do that live on a stream. So let's just expire this in 7 days. Fine.
Yeah,
I'm going to expire it
and
tomorrow.
yeah, tomorrow, because we don't want anybody seeing this to get read permissions to your GitHub account. Again, you don't need all of it. No, 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 no. You marked all of it. You don't need all of it.
Oh man.
You also need the third one, public. Yeah.
Okay, we need
Gist.
user.
Gist
And we
is right
need
above that. Yep. Gist is
yes,
right
yep.
over there. Yep, there it is.
And admin reorg. And public key.
Yeah, I don't. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 6. You need to have 8. Make sure you have 8, because I can't really see clearly
All
that
right,
you have
1,
all
2,
of them.
3, 4, 5,
5,
6,
6,
7.
7.
Oh,
You're
we're
still
missing
missing one.
status.
Yeah, you're missing one.
Status. Oh no, we have status.
Which one are you missing? Let's see.
Repo
Read
hook.
org, read user.
There we go.
There it is. Yep. Okay, so now that you have all of them, yeah, and you need to copy it, of course. Make sure you have it somewhere accessible, because hopefully we'll get to running it continuously later, and we're going to need it. Now that you have it, yeah, GH token, there it is. Awesome. Now, the easiest way to run GitGat is by using the Docker image. You can just copy the line from the documentation. Docker run gh token scribe security GitGat latest data gh post gist. The post gist means that the report will be immediately exported to your gists. Now, depending on how big and complex your GitHub account is, or whatever it is connected to, it might take 30 seconds or so to finish the report. If everything works fine, you should get the results of 201 created, and everything will be fine. And then we'll go to the gists and look at the report you got.
So just to clarify what happens, and
Mm-hmm.
my OCD will never let me get away with using the old school Docker commands. So is that this is going to use my GitHub token, and it's going to scan my whole account. It's not like a single repository. It's not a single team. It's not a single organization. It's whatever I have access to. Okay.
Yeah. Now, again, it's not mandatory. Obviously, you can limit the report to a single repository or a single whatever, but that's slightly more fine-grained. And as a beginning, as the simplest thing you can do to get the report is to run it this way and see whatever it is you're doing. Obviously, because this is private, or at least that's usually private when you're not doing it live on YouTube or LinkedIn, you want to see everything that you're connected to, whatever teams or collaborators or public repositories that you forgot about, that you have somewhere.
Okay. Is that it? It's finished?
Unable to find, no, it's not usually unable to find image. I have not encountered that.
I then pulled it and we got empty parentheses at the end. I think it just finished, right?
Well, if it's finished, then we can go back to your GitHub and look at your gists and see if we got the report.
I think the last one is some Rust, so I don't think
Yeah,
we got a
I don't
report.
see it here. Can you run it again? I don't know why it wouldn't work, because I ran it just before we started and it went just fine. You don't need to download the image just to run it through your Docker. That's weird. Well, we can always try running it locally, just to see if we can get the JSON file and not the gist. That's the second thing we can try.
Okay, so what do I run?
Just a second.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just a second. Eval, GitGat latest.
I hope I didn't miss any permissions.
I don't think so. You get all the permissions that you needed to. Let me just here. Full JSON file. I'm just making sure I didn't miss anything, so I'm looking at the commands that I ran before we started. And just to make sure that everything is exactly the same, I'm going to send that command over to you. There it is. Docker run -e gh token scribe security get latest to data gh eval.
Let's try the eval then.
Yeah, that should give you the report.
It's taking longer.
On the screen. Yeah, that should give you the JSON report immediately on the screen so that at least you can see that it's working.
Yeah, it's definitely doing something this time, which is good.
Yeah, and if we need to, we can always I can always share my screen and show the gist report just because I want people to be able to see it. And I don't have any embarrassing secrets on my GitHub account that people shouldn't see. No, of course I do, but I don't mind sharing. Because I wasn't always in security, and some of my very, very old repositories have embarrassing stuff in them.
So I guess
your
I must have a
account
big
seems to
GitHub
be.
account.
Yeah, you probably do.
I've been an open source contributor for about 16 years, so probably.
Wow. Yeah, then you probably. I know that one of the reasons I can share my screen and show my account is because other than my private account, I also got this Scribe demo account in which I'm an admin, and I'm also a member of the Scribe, the usual account of Scribe, which is usually most of it is private, but because Mr. permissions to all of them, GitGat scans all of them. So it wouldn't just tell me if there are, for example, too many admins in my own repository. It would also check the Scribe demo, and it would also check Scribe, the regular Scribe, as it were, Scribe public. Because I don't want people to be staring at a blank screen, how about I just open share my screen and show the report.
Yeah, go for it.
Just because I don't know how long this will take, and it just feels. Yeah. Okay. Share. Can you see my screen?
Let me just click a few magic buttons, swap the scene over, and now, yes, we see GitGat account security audits.
Awesome. So what you can see at the top here is report.json. I know it's a very imaginative name. So if you really want to look at the JSON, you can copy it, look at it, whatever you need to, if a JSON really speaks to you and you're more comfortable looking at that. But for most people, I imagine that a gist will be more comfortable. Now, the report MD, which is markdown language, it appears in your gists. To those of you who are not familiar, in order to get your gists, just go to your little icon image and you can see your gists. Just to show you how they look, these are all my gists. You can see that I ran this earlier today, about 6 hours ago. Clicking here would just get me back to the report. Now, this is the GitGat account security audit. There's overview, most of the stuff that it checks. We wanted it to be, clear. So we have the motivation, the findings, and recommendations. Motivation would usually explain what it is we're checking and why. Findings are the actual, information, and recommendations is useful because if there's activities that you need to do or are recommended to do, you can just do them using the links. So let's take a look at what GitGat is looking at. First of all, public access. Very easy to know that, or at least most people know, that when you create a repository on GitHub, it can either be public or private. If it's private, you're the only one who has access to it. It's not visible online. Nobody sees it. Nobody knows about it. But if it's public, everybody can see it. Even if you didn't tell anybody and it's public, it's still visible online. And if people can search for it, people can find it. And people can essentially look at the code, fork it, do whatever they want with it. Now, this one tells me that I have 30 repositories that are public. It says 30 out of 30 just because it doesn't see my private ones, and there are a few private ones. So I have 30 repositories that are public. Now, the interesting thing that you can see here is that it checks Mr. B Lightning, which is me on GitHub. It also checks Scribe Demo, and it also checks Scribe Public and Scribe Security. So it checks everything that I'm somehow connected with, not just me. And it tells me that if I want to change public repositories to private, all I need to do is go for one of these links. And let's click on this one just as an example. Takes me to this repository, which is I feel you build. And if I want to change the visibility, I just go to the danger zone. It's right. Let's get through this. Two-factor authentication, extremely important. If you use two-factor authentication, people would have a slightly harder time breaking into your account, stealing things, changing things. We want to make it as difficult as possible for people to do bad things in your account. Now, it's not just about you personally. If you have an organizational account, the person controlling that account can essentially force everybody on that organization to use two-factor authentication. The key finding here is that no organization has members with two-factor authentication disabled, which is a convoluted way to say that all the people it has access to checking. What was that?
That was a motorbike outside my window, sorry.
Okay, sounded ominous. It's a convoluted way of saying that everybody has two-factor authentication enabled. And all organizations have overall enforcement, which is good. The recommendation is pretty much the same. It tells you where to go in order to set up your organizational two-factor authentication, or your private one if you are not an organization. Since the link is right there and you can read about two-factor authentication just on GitHub documentation, I'm not going to explain too much about it. Admin permissions, very simple. Admins have extensive permissions on GitHub, so you want to keep the admin number as small as possible, the minimum that is actually required. There's a lot of organizations in which people, if they have a problem on GitHub, we just give the IT department would just give them admin permissions to get over whatever problem it is, which is wrong because admins have, like I said, extensive permissions. They can do bad things if unchecked. It actually shows that on Scribe Demo, there are 3 admins. On Scribe Security, there are 7. And on Scribe Security Test, there are 3. Notice that Mr. B Lightning, which is me personally, is not actually represented here because it's a private account, or actually it's not an organization. And the admin permissions is only relevant for organizations because obviously if I'm the only person that is representing Mr. B Lightning, there's no point in checking the number of admins. It's not really relevant. And like I said, the recommendation is to have the bare minimum, the actual people who need that level of permission added. The next thing that GitGat is checking is teams. The idea is to, again, make sure that team members have only the permissions and the access level that they need, nothing beyond that. Because team members can sometimes change teams or get shuffled around, people don't always make sure to curb excess access. I know, slightly complicated sentence. The idea here is that if a team member changes team and needs to work on different repositories or suddenly has a different job, make sure that their access level is changed accordingly. Again, this is more relevant, obviously, for organizational accounts than private ones. Collaborators is pretty much the same. You need to check your collaborators, make sure that if a person is no longer a collaborator, you should revoke their access. Branch protection is probably the most comprehensive thing that we can cover. I'm not going to go too far into it, but I will show you what that means. Notice here that there are 92 branches that are lacking any protection rules. If you're not familiar with GitHub's branch protection rules, we'll take a look right here at what they look like. Branch protection rules are one of GitHub's best way of protecting branches. Obviously, the most important branch you want to protect is main. So, you can just add the main name here. Things you can do with branch protection rules are require pull request before merging, require status checks to pass, require conversation resolution, require signed commits. Very, very important to help prevent fraud, because, unless, in case you didn't know, anybody can appear to be anybody else on GitHub. All you need is their username and email, and you can appear to be somebody else. Just like you can appear to be anybody else on Slack. Again, very common. If you didn't know, check it out. It's frighteningly easy to impersonate other people on GitHub unless you use signed commits. Require linear history, require deployments to succeed. There's a whole bunch of rules here, including preventing admins from being able to circumvent these rules. Also, very useful. And just like you can protect main, there are also other branches you might want to protect, but this is up to you. Notice that the report only checks if there are branch protection rules, any rules. It doesn't check for the presence of all of them or even some of them. So even if you have a branch protected by one single rule, whichever, it would already be considered protected. It's completely up to you. But having particularly main branches without any protection, is probably not the best idea. And notice there are 92 branches that I personally have never bothered protecting on my personal account because I'm a naughty boy. Signed commits, I already mentioned, and it's so important that we figured we wanted to check that separately. Deploy keys and SSH keys are both very important because they enable external applications to access your GitHub account. So you want to make sure that you revoke them over time, that you rotate them over time. And again, I don't want to go too deeply into this because you can always check it out later. Just know that this is part of the report. So even if you forgot about some deploy key or SSH key that you previously set up for whatever reason, this will remind you of it. So we're already about half an hour in, and I showed you a lot of the report. And I think, even if you had no idea what you could use this for, you can see that it's incredibly fine-grained. And the fact that there are links here to enable you to go exactly to where you need to go to do what you would theoretically want to do and learn about it is quite useful. And again, the fact that it appears in a gist is also quite useful. And if you want to use the JSON for a machine-readable file to send it wherever, you can also do that. So this is the basic level of the currently GitHub security posture report. Like I said, more relevant to organizational accounts than private accounts, but even if you're a private account, you can still learn something. For example, even if you, for example, were a collaborator or have some access to some organization, you'll be able to see the information on that as well, as far as it pertains to you, or the things that you have access to. I will now stop sharing so we can go back to seeing where you are.
So
let's see if that report finished.
It did finish. I even ran it again and put it through JQ so we could get a bit of color as well. So we have lots.
Yeah.
It's chunky.
And yeah, you can see that seeing it as a JSON is definitely not as user friendly. You can learn a lot from the JSON. Obviously, there's a lot of information there. It's just not as readable, at least not immediately. If you're experienced, you can definitely read it pretty easily. But I believe that the gist solution is quite handy. That's why I requested it, so that anybody can look at the markdown report and be able to immediately understand what was happening, even if they didn't have any too heavily development background and are not that familiar with reading JSON files. So like I said, this is the basic level, the easiest, most immediate thing that you can do with GitGat. It doesn't require almost anything other than having the token, which you created quite handily. It didn't even take you 5 minutes. And running the report, again, it could take longer depending on how complicated your GitHub account is, but it's not, it doesn't take minutes or hours to run the report. And now that you have this JSON file, you can keep it and use it as a reference to what happens in your account over time.
Sure,
now that we said over time, let's jump. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you're about to go into something I was about to
question?
ask you about. Yeah, sorry, I don't know.
Sure,
It's
sure.
my,
Ask away.
I think my latency is bad today. I'm not sure what's going on. Like even my camera, I can see myself lagging behind.
Mm.
Anyway, we're not going to worry about that. Uh, you know, the JSON is great, right? So I now have kind of machine
Mhm.
programmatic access to be able to do things with this that I want, which I think is really interesting. The gist, sorry, is much more consumable for humans. And then you mentioned over
Mhm.
time, which is great because the thing I was thinking about as well, if I run this, say every day, every week, every month, whatever that cadence is going to be, is that I'm going to want to track improvement. It's like, do we have the ability? Is any of this exported as metrics? Like, could I build a Grafana Prometheus dashboard from some of this information? Is that something that's possible today?
You could definitely do that as long as as long as you have access to the information, which is why the next part of running it continuously requires you to fork GitGat, putting it on your personal GitHub account, and then using a workflow to run it continuously, which is what we're going to do now to show how easy it is. And obviously, once you have a workflow in GitGat as part of your GitHub, you can do whatever you want with the information. You can export the files, you can save them in either on GitHub or on your own machine, do whatever you want with them. Again, once you have it on your own GitHub and you start working with the workflow and with the state, which is we're going to get to the state later, after I explain how to run it continuously, you'll see that, like you said, there's a lot more options and a lot you can play with. Let's start with showing you how to run it continuously because I feel like it's an important advancement over running it once, seeing the report, saying, "Hey, that's cool," and then forgetting about it. So let's see how to run it continuously. So fork GitGat over to your GitHub.
All right. And should I run it on the organization?
Um, Again, as long sure. It doesn't really matter as long as it's on your GitHub. Because remember, you already created an access token, and we're going to use that access token in your essentially copy of GitGat. So now that you have GitGat as part of Rawkode Academy, yep, you go to settings,
I'm assuming we're
go to
adding.
settings, and then you yeah, essentially you're adding um, a new repository secret.
So is this some like when you run a GitHub action, you actually get ephemeral GitHub token available, and you can tweak the permissions inside of the run. But I don't know if that's scoped purely to like the repository itself, or if you can elevate it to the organization. But that could be something fun to experiment with as well, actually.
Like I said, you can actually run the report on a particular repository, or even if you want to, on particular folder or particular files. But I feel like that it's more useful to run it over an entire organization, unless once introduce you to the idea of state, unless the state is significantly different enough between different repositories that you want to have a different report for each repository, and you can do that. You can have separate workflows running Git a different GitGat report on different repositories with different states. Slightly more work intensive to do or to set up, but once you set it up, it would continuously run however you set it up, and you can always modify the state to get whatever results you're after. But we haven't gotten into state yet. Let's concentrate on getting this to work. You already set up the GH token,
Yep,
so now, or I believe you did. I might have missed it because I was talking. Now that you did, you go to actions. In the GH token, you copied the same token you had earlier, right?
that's correct. Yeah,
Great. That's exactly the token we needed. So now you go into actions. Not here. No, on the top. On the top line, there's actions there. Yep, that's the one. Yep, you understand. Right. Now, on the left side, continuously run GitGat. Now, the first time you run it, it'll just, just to see that you run it, that everything is fine. You can see on the right there, run the workflow. Yep, run it. So now it's running. And, like we saw earlier, it might take a while, but because you now have it as a workflow, there, now it's running. It will take as much time as needed. But now that you have it as part of a workflow, you can, well, obviously now it's running once, but if you want to, you can set it up as a cron job. So in order to set up currently, and the easiest way to do this as something that runs continuously, you go to code. I see that it didn't finish for whatever reason, but we can worry about that later. Go to code, which is the leftmost marker there. Yeah, and the top folder is now GitHub workflows. And the top one is right, yep. And you can see that in order to make this run continuously, all you have to do is remove the commenting on those two lines. Not the top one, because it tells you to remove the next two, right? And if you remove the commenting on the schedule, and yeah, essentially it will run every 23 hours. Now, this again, we try to make it as easy, as simple as possible for people who didn't understand too much about this, to do this relatively easily. If you are not familiar with cron or how to set up cron jobs and stuff like that, I'm now sending a link to David, and hopefully he can show it on screen. That you can essentially use that link to specify whatever iteration you want, and it will show you how to specify that in a cron manner. You can set up you can tell it to run at a specific date, a specific time, every so and so time. This is just one that I found. I'm sure there are others, either more useful or more fun or whatever. But even if you have absolutely no idea about how to set up a cron job, you can find one of these sites or this one, and figure out the iteration that you want it to run at. And now that you have that, you essentially have a way of running GitGat continuously. Once it is done continuously, you will always get the results, presumably in your gist if you set it up that way. And also, it enables you to start working with a state. Now, before we go into a state, any questions so far?
No, I think I understand what's happening. I'm curious of why my run failed.
It didn't. Yeah. I
It just says,
can't really see it clearly enough to be able to tell.
yeah, there's no error message. It just says process completed with exit code 125. But there's no error
Well,
message.
I can. Yeah, I'll ask the developer who wrote it what 125 is. Um, since, like I said, I didn't write the code myself. Since I don't really remember what 125 is, but I can definitely ask. And we can add it as a comment once the stream is done, because I don't know if he's available right now. In case our viewers are not aware, it is now about 7 o'clock in the evening where I am, so most people are no longer at the office or available.
Okay, so
But yeah, we try to keep it
the
as
variable's
simple as
wrong.
possible for new people to. Mhm.
So in
Again, I can't see the screen clearly enough.
yeah, the variable inside of the GitHub action is GitHub secret rather than GH token. So let's see if I can fix this.
It should be GH token. Sure, I ran it, like I said, I ran it everything earlier, and it seemed to have worked fine. I don't know why it didn't.
Oh, we can't rename them. Okay, let's add a new one.
You can
Let's have
create a new one. Yeah.
GitHub secret. Is it still in my buffer? No. Let me grab that from up here. I don't know why I'm hiding it. I mean, I'm then just pasting it directly in front of everybody.
We
However,
already showed it. Yeah, we already showed it. Like I highly recommend you disable it as soon as the stream is done.
oh, we can't start it as GitHub. Let's check out this
Yeah, you
action
just go
again.
to actions. Yeah, you just go
So,
to actions and run it again. You can always go to
oh,
actions
all right,
and
okay. Yeah, the
run it
env.
again.
Oh, GH secret, not GH token. Okay. Now we're okay. Now I
Yeah,
can fix this. Yeah, okay. In fact, you probably
yeah.
told me to do that, and I probably just.
Yeah, it was supposed to be GH. Yeah, like I said, I'm looking at several things at the same time, so must have missed it.
All right, so let's run that again.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
supposed to
and
be
that,
GH.
yeah. And let's trigger the manual run,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and we'll give that just a moment. So hopefully that runs a bit better. But maybe while that does hopefully run, you can tell us a little bit about state.
Sure, sure. I would love to. Um, okay, the idea behind state is we wanted to enable people to tell the report what they're interested in, what things they no longer want to hear about because they're fine, and being able to tell the report essentially various things that they want to pay particular attention to. What does that mean? Well, let's say, let's take my report that I showed you earlier as an example. It said that there are 30 repositories that are currently public. Let's say that this is the fifth time I'm getting the report, and it keeps telling me the exact same thing. Now, I know about these 30 repositories. I know they're public. I'm fine with the fact that they're public. If I don't want to get the same notification again, all I can say, I can go to the state and set up these repositories as public. And essentially, everything in the state is fine. It's how it's supposed to be. So it wouldn't alert me once again to things that I've already told him is fine. Now, it's particularly relevant if you're in a big organization and you have not a couple of dozen repositories, but a couple of hundreds or more repositories, and you have potentially hundreds of people, including collaborators, including teams, including admins, and going over all the information all the time is extremely tiring. I see that the report finished successfully this time. Um, so the idea is, again, once you get the report and you check everything, you fix whatever you wanted to fix, and you have a basic state of your security posture that you want to keep it that way, you put everything in the state, which you can do because essentially the state is just a JSON file, and you can copy the things that you want into it from the report that you got as a JSON. Once you put the stuff in the state, which I'll show you some of the basic stuff later. Once you copy stuff into the state, all the stuff that is in there you will no longer get in the report. It's fine. That means that once you set up the state and you run the report continuously, all the only things you will get are the deltas. What is different from the state? Let's say you added more repositories, added more team members, more admins, people that have somehow failed, disabled their multi-factor authentication, um, disabled their signed commits, various things that are new. That makes the report a lot shorter and a lot easier to work with than seeing a gigantic organizational GitHub account report every single time. So the first thing that the state is for is to enable you to work, your work a lot easier. And the second thing is to use it to set up specific use cases, but we'll get to that possibly later. So now that I basically explained what the state is, and because the report has run successfully and you've set up the cron job to make it run every 23 hours currently, which is fine. Let's talk a little bit about the state, or where to find it, where to play with it. So if you will look in your GitHub account, or should I say GitGat, actually, you will notice, you can just go back to code. Yeah, you will notice a folder called data.
Yep.
Now, in data right now, there are two files. One is an empty input, Essentially, that's an example file that you can use, rename, use however you want as some sort of input file. We'll get to the input later. And there is a sample input. Now, the sample input is there to show you various things that you could theoretically put in an input file and how they would look. Let's open that and just take a look at it for a second. Again, a JSON file. You can see by let me just open it on my screen because, like I said, I can't really look at it on yours. Just a second. Got the workflows. I'm going to GitGat to data to the sample input. There. Obviously, the first line that you see is token. It just makes it easier. You no longer, if you include that here, and GH token has been defined, you no longer have to put the GH token every time you run the report. Organizations, you can set up whichever organizations you want the report to be running on. You don't have to include all of them in case you are a member or running several organizations. Two-factor authentication, admins, commits. A lot of the stuff here is essentially exactly the same as what we saw in the GIST report. So the naming conventions is pretty standard, pretty easy to follow. One of the things that I can show you, for example, is if you go slightly lower, you can see files with permissions. This will enable you, if you want to set up particular files which have particular permissions, as in if somebody who is not supposed to handles particular files or repositories, the report will alert to it. One of the things that I really need to stress here is that GitGat, because it's a read-only report and it's a report only, it can't do anything. It can't stop, for example, an admin from accessing something. It can't really, make any sort of stance on protecting anything. The only thing it can do is note when something that you didn't want happen and tell you about it in the report. Now, assuming you're running the report every day, let's say somebody with admin access touched something they're not supposed to, the very next day you'll get that in the report. So that's a useful thing to have. Even if you couldn't stop it, at least you'll know about it. You have hooks here, you have teams, you have branches. Once again, you can set particular branches to be slightly more protected than others. There's a lot of stuff here, but because this is an example, you can essentially look at it and figure out how your input file should look if you want to do something specific. You can just play with it, run the report, see what you get, if you want to. One of the things that I can show you as an example, and again, I can show this to you, but running it will not really be that effective because it depends on the initial report that I ran for myself. Let's say that in Scribe Demo, which is one of the organizations that I'm in charge of because it's a demo, there was a user who didn't have two-factor authentication for whatever reason. But that user, which I happen to know, is located in a different country and it doesn't have two-factor authentication for a good reason. There's a problem with the network, it didn't work, whatever. He needed to be able to access the organizational GitHub without two-factor authentication. Now, I didn't want to get the report telling me every single time that user was problematic. So what I would do, let me just write, essentially I would write it in the chat, and hopefully you can show that. Actually, you know what? No, I can just show it by sharing my screen.
Yeah,
that would be simpler. Okay, there it is. Okay, so this is the example I was talking about. Obviously, the first line is token, which is in our case GH token. And in order to make sure that this weak authenticated user, which is the example user I was talking about, wasn't popping up on the report every single time, I would include TFA, disabled members, Scribe demo, this user. Now, the fact that this user is now included in the TFA or two-factor authentication list, or essentially, TFA section of the report means that when the report shows that this particular user doesn't have 2FA, because it's part of the state, he would no longer be included in the report. The state says it's fine. I know about it. I accepted it. I wrote it. It's fine. I no longer need to be alerted to this fact every single time. It's fine. There are other examples that we can, like, I think I can show you. Let me roll down a little bit. No, that's like a very, very simplified example that shows what it can do. I think that I have a better example a little later. Yeah. Now, remember I said that we can protect particular files. So this is the example for that, for a file level permission. In files, permissions in this particular um, repository, the README MD file can be accessed by these authors and these committers. Essentially, both of these are an array, so I can have this as many as I want. But that means that if a different author or a different committer than the ones written in my list have done anything to this file, my report will tell me about it. So this is a way for me to protect particular files in particular repositories from unwanted access. Now, again, when I say protect, just means I'll be alerted to it, I'll know about it. I can't really stop people who have legitimate access, but I can make sure that I know about it. I think this is one of the better examples for fine-grained file protection that you can set up using GitGat. GitHub itself doesn't really enable you to do this, but GitGat does.
Nice.
Any questions? Any questions so far?
No, I think a lot of this is making sense. I love the fact that we can kind of put all this together, get the report, monitor things, continue to improve. It's
Mm-hmm.
not all about finding a
Mm-hmm.
silver bullet with security. It's all about continuous improvement and making sure that whatever we have
Yeah.
today was better than yesterday. The only thing that's really kind of floating around my head is that, you said all of this is written on Rego. Like, what if I wanted to contribute my own policies or have my own private policies? Is that something that is possible?
Of course it is. Yeah. Just now, you essentially forked GitGat. It is now uh, essentially yours to play with as you want. One of the chapters which I've added to the Linux Foundation course, which I mentioned, and actually because I wanted to make sure that our viewers have the link if they want to. I'll now share the link with you so you can show it on screen, just because, you can consider it a cheat sheet for GitGat, having the course, available. It's free. There's absolutely no reason not to look at it. So Linux Foundation 122X is the name of the course, or their name for it. It's GitHub Supply Chain Security using GitGat. The final chapter is how to add additional queries to the report. Now, I know that most people, or at least most of our viewers, would not be familiar with OPA or with Rego, which is fine. The chapter assumes that you don't have that much information about either Rego or OPA, but you do have some, not a lot, some understanding of how to code. It shows you what you need to do, where you need to do it, and because everything is reliant on GitHub API, at least as much as we're talking about GitHub security posture right now. So we're using the GitHub API in order to look at the GitHub API, see what you need to get. It's very simple. GitHub has very handy API links. So you figure out what you want to ask the API, you figure out the information you want from it, and the how to essentially the example is how to add it as a query. The query that were the last chapter of the course is adding is how to make or add different organizations. Get essentially a list of the organizations that you are a member of separately, just as an example, obviously. But just like you can do that, you can essentially play with it to have your own queries, your own information. Obviously, would be happy to, once you figure out a query, you can just add it, send a PR, or do a PR to the actual scribe GitGat, and we'll be happy to add it so that everybody can use it. Like I mentioned earlier, GitLab is just on the verge of being added. Obviously, it will be slightly different. It will be more on GitLab than GitHub. Eventually, we're hoping to add all the other SCMs as well. The more people play with this, the more people add queries and useful information, the better it will be for everybody. And even if you choose not to share whatever queries you develop yourself with everybody, the fact that you can custom fit the state and the input to exactly what it is you need, what your organizational requirements are, I think essentially means that you can take GitGat and make it your own tool. You take the basic, package that we created and you make it your own. You can, even if you're fine with people not using 2FA, you're fine with every single one of your users being admin, you're fine with nobody using signed commits. If you're fine with it, just put it in the input. The report will no longer, bother you about it. Just, as long as you are aware of the ramifications of your actions and your choices, it's your repository. Do whatever you want with it.
All right. I guess again, a final question for me is like, is GitGat done? Like, what's on the roadmap?
No, 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 no. Like I said, the next closest thing within, like, let's say a week or so, is adding GitLab, almost completely ready, and it's in testing right now. Once it's done, I'll update the documentation so that people who use GitLab will know how to use it essentially just as easily as people who use GitHub right now can. Obviously, GitLab is slightly different UI. So I'll make sure that everything I write is just as clear. After that, there are other SCMs. And once we're done with, or actually in parallel with adding additional SCMs, we're constant queries because there are other things that the GitHub API can allow us to check, and there's more things that we want to be able to show people. This is essentially like this when we built it, this was our basic list, stuff that we absolutely wanted or had to show people, especially, for example, the branch protection rules, which definitely not enough people are familiar or aware of, which is, I think, a very, very useful tool by GitHub. It's a shame more people are not aware of it. And I'm sure GitLab and Bitbucket and others have other things like that, and we want to make sure people know about it. And seeing it in their report is one of the ways to make sure people are aware. Essentially, the whole thing is just, make people aware of SCM security posture, protect your code better.
Awesome. Is there anything else that we haven't covered yet that you want to cover before we finish up today?
Um, Well, like I said, there's a lot of fine-grained, fine details that you can do that we haven't really covered, but I don't feel like we need to, like setting up GitGat to run on a particular repository or a particular file. It's all in the documentation. I want to encourage people, so I don't want to show everything. I want to encourage people to go to GitGat, play with it themselves. Uh, Play with the actual code, add queries, play with the state, and define their own uh, definitions and conditions to it just to see what they get. The more people play with it, the more they make it their own, and hopefully we'll get additional maintainers for this repository, for this project.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day, for sitting down and guiding us through this, and for your work on all the documentation. I think that's going to be really useful to people as they start to explore and bring GitGat into their organizations. I think what I love about it is, again, it's got this educational aspect to it. We don't often think about our security posture outside of the code that we write, but there's lots of things that have to be taken into consideration. And something like branch protection, you're right, it's like just one of those features that's right there staring you in the face, and yet most of the time we rarely turn it on. And I think just having something we can stick in a GitHub action, let it just run and get a report once a week or whenever that just says, hey, you've still not changed the branch protection rules. You've still not enabled 2FA for this user. You've still having random interns write to your production environment file. Like, these are things you don't want to happen. And until you have that constant nagging thing on your shoulder, not that GitGat is nagging, but you have that awareness, right? It's too easy forgotten, too easy just to sweep it under the rug and we'll get around to it later. And unfortunately, later is never soon enough when we have malicious actors on the internet. So very cool tool.
The two things that, a couple of things, like I said earlier, that people can easily forget about: SSH keys and deploy keys. You set them up, you say, oh, they'll set it for 6 months or a year. That application is no longer running after 3 months, but the key is still there. If somebody who's not approved to get access to that key, they can have access to GitHub account. You really want to keep on top of these keys, and this report is one of the ways to do that, to make sure you're not missing any keys, you didn't forget about any keys. If somebody, for example, you get an alert that somebody accessed your GitHub account, the first thing you want to do is make sure you disable all your keys. Just, on the off chance they might have gotten off with one.
Nice. All right. Let me pop us back over to Big Face Mode. But again, thank you so much for spending time. If people have any questions, if you're watching us after the fact, then links to Twitter profiles and GitHub repositories, I'll even add the Linux Foundation course, will all be in the description below momentarily. Any last words before we wrap up?
And I think that you can also add all the links to me. I think you mentioned that, but I'm not sure you did. So I'm saying, if you didn't, you can add those: my email, my LinkedIn, my Twitter. Feel free to ask me anything, either about GitGat or about what Scribe Security does. I'm the developer advocate. That's my job, to explain things. So feel free to ask.
All right. Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, you have a wonderful evening. Hopefully speak to you again soon. And if there's any major feature updates and you want to reach back out, please feel free to anytime. To everyone who watched, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you all next time. Adios.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Rawkode.